Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this is the 2023 Versys 1000 SE LT, top of the line, everything. There's only really the one model in Canada, but this has everything. This is a flagship model within the Kawasaki lineup, and I'm going to go through a lot of the technology in this bike today so that you understand not just what the acronym is, but how it affects you as a rider. So what I'm going to try to do is turn it from acronyms into things that make sense to you, and I'm going to be able to show you things that other videos aren't showing you, just because I think sometimes they gloss over details because they want to show you the riding reviews. This is an in-depth review here in the showroom here to make sure that you understand what this is all about. Obviously, if you want to see riding reviews, there's great ones out there on this bike. I'm a huge fan of this bike. I used to have a Versys 650 for many years, had the same bags. This one is a big step up, so we'll talk about where it sits in the Versys lineup. We'll explain the technologies to you, and like I said, we're going to show you things other videos aren't showing you. If you want to know more about this bike, I am filming here at Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's Power Sports, and they give me complete access to their entire vehicle lineup. So if you have questions, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments below, because I will come back to your questions and answer them both in the comments and in future videos. And if you own this bike, let us know what it's like. So let's fill the comments section for those who are looking at this bike. Tell them how great it is, tell them what it's about, and yeah, let this be a little resource that people can use online. If you want to see this bike, Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals is the #1 volume Kawasaki dealer in the country. It's sitting here right now, so feel free to come in and take a look. Let's get going with this review. All right, if you've been researching this bike for a while, the next 30 seconds or so are going to be review, but we got to set up where this fits in the lineup and what it is as a motorcycle. So first of all, the Versys lineup, Versys, Versatile Systems, that's how they get the name, and that's exactly what this is designed to be. Fairly versatile and overall part of a system. So let's talk about really quickly in the lineup. There is a Versys 300X, or Versys X300. That is the entry-level model. It's a twin-cylinder 300cc bike. It is the only one with a little bit of off-road capability. When I say a little bit, it's got trail or tires that can be used on something like a dirt road. They have a little bit more of a slight off-road tread. All of the Versys lineup is really designed as a road bike, not a dual sport bike, not really an adventure bike, and certainly not an adventure bike when you move to the 650 or into the 1000 that we're looking at today. So Versys, but all of them, you sit upright, all of them give you wind protection, all of them are very comfortable, and all of them can be used for touring. The 300, of course, with that smaller engine is going to be fine for touring on the interstate highways, but really best for this back road highways. And then there's the 650. The 650 is a bike that I've owned, and I've talked about it to people. If you're looking at a Ninja 650 and you're only going to stay on the street, the Versys 650 is probably all the sport bike you need. It is plenty sporty. Because it's a little lighter than this, to me, it's a little bit more playful in turns, especially on country highways and that kind of thing. So the Versys 650, great for all kinds of riding, but it has a little bit less technology than this. It also has a smaller engine. That 650 engine is absolutely great for the street, but it is something that is a really good, what I call a single-person touring bike. Not to say you can't take two people on it, but when you take two people on the Versys 650, it loses part of the playfulness of that bike, which is a real key piece of riding that bike. So again, you can tour with two people on it, but it's better to take two people just for a day trip or something like that than to really go on longer tours. This bike fills the gap. It loses some of the playfulness of the 650 and the 300 simply because of the size of it. It is a large bike, but it is very, very sporty, especially compared to anything that sort of allows you to tour, and that's what this really does. So as a bike, what is it? It is a touring bike first that has good sporting potential and great technology. Its #1 thing is comfort. It's not designed to be an all-out sport bike. It's designed to be very comfortable, but still give you that sporting ability. So when you get to those roads that you've been heading to, maybe you're driving days to get to the coast and want to drive the coastline for a few days. If you're driving on the interstate highways with this all day long, no problem. But when you get to the coast and those curly roads, you can drive this and have a lot of fun on it. So that's sort of where it sits. Now let's get into what it's like for me as a rider on it. We'll talk about the weight, and then we'll start talking about the technologies. So a very, very important piece to this bike is what it's like to sit on. So again, I'm about 6 feet tall. I am taller. All of the Versys line is good for taller people. You'll have to decide if you're shorter, if this works for you. Now, I believe you can get a lowered seat. You have some ability to adapt this to different riders, but this is a stock bike. There are no options on it at all. It includes things like a center stand, which I'm not sure if I'll show you in the video, so I want to make sure I mention it right now. All the side bags, the back here, we'll get to some of those in a second. But let's just jump on it here. And again, as a 6-footer, I am just about flat feet. If I had a tiny bit of a heel to my feet, to my heels there, I could go flat foot both sides. So it is, like I said, a little bit taller bike than something like a cruiser bike, which again are known for being shorter bikes. It gives you a great visibility of the road. And part of the height here, again, seat height is measured in the specs, but it is a little bit wider seat, and that can mean that, you know, if this was narrower, I could absolutely put my feet down. So when you're comparing seat height between brands, between bikes, you may find that something with a similar seat height feels a little different. They sometimes have narrow seats which are less comfortable. So again, this is a little bit wider seat, a little bit wider area. It's got a 4-cylinder engine to cover here, inline 4-cylinder. But if you see here, if I sit, I'm very square, very comfortable. This is absolutely an all-day riding position. And again, for someone my height, it works very well. So you have a few things that are also going to keep you protected. When you sit upright, you're not in that aerodynamic position that you would be in a sport bike, so you need to get some bodywork around you, and this one takes care of you. First of all, the overall bodywork is going to clear your legs here. So on cooler weather days, you have that wind not coming across your legs, which makes it very comfortable. You also have the benefit of hand guards here. Now, hand guards are on the 650 as well. They do a good job of keeping the wind, debris, and other things off of your hands, but this one also comes standard with heated grip. So again, cool weather, going to be great. And then you have this windshield here, which we're going to take a little bit closer look a little bit later, but it is adjustable as well, so it can come up and down, give you good wind protection. It can send the wind right over your helmet. It can allow some wind to come through to you if you want. So overall, the general size of this bike, the visual size of this bike appears to be quite large. You have a nice big spread here, but again, a lot of this bodywork is not heavy stuff, so visually it looks like a massive bike. But from a weight perspective, especially compared to a cruiser, it's actually pretty good. Certainly it's a little bit heavier than the 650, and it should be, but the weight is down low. They do a good job of centralizing that because they want this still to be a sport touring bike, and a sport touring bike has to have weight down low, has to be maneuverable. So you can see here for a 1000cc bike that's this tall, it's very easy to bring back and forth. It's quite easy to walk around. But again, physically it's a very large bike and it does have some weight. It's definitely not really a beginner bike. So we'll talk about the engine in that in a second. So there's your seating position, your overall riding position with weather protection. Now let's start digging in from the front to back. We'll go through some of those technologies. So let's start by taking a look at the front wheel here. I always say you can sort of tell everything you need to know about a motorcycle, at least the intended purpose of the motorcycle, just by looking at the front wheel and everything that's about it right here. So first of all, let's talk about the tires. These are not touring tires like a touring bike. These are sport touring tires. In fact, the actual brand is Bridgestone Battle Axe Sport Touring T31s. So it's a sport touring tire. What that usually means is you're going to have a firmer section down the center of the tire here, which is going to give you good wear, and then you're going to have a nice grippy section on the edge, and that allows you to have fun and good grip on the corners. So that's pretty typical stuff. You know, I think you would expect that here. You'll also see that there's upside down forks here. Now we're going to talk about the suspension in a second because it does a whole lot of stuff that's really interesting, but I want to just give you the look here. The upside down forks on their own, without talking about the suspension pieces that are unique to this bike, which we'll get to in a second, usually give you a little bit less unsprung weight, a little bit more stiffness up top. It's a more high-end component. It works well. And again, these are electronically controlled, which is really cool. Front and rear. We'll talk about that in a second here. You also have your brakes here. Now you have radial mount brakes. This is a little bit different than you'd see something like on something like the Versys 650. This is a more high-end component. It allows for high-end upgrades if you wanted to, but as it is, it has more stiffness, more brake surface area. It's very good. And I was wrong the other day. I think I did the ZX4RR, and I said that there wasn't a lot of radial mount brakes. In fact, there was none in the Kawasaki lineup that had the pedal-style rotors. I was wrong. The Versys 1000 still uses these pedal-style rotors. In theory, this is about heat dispersion, although there's a lot of bikes, including the Ninja 1000 and a lot of other bikes. My Z900 RS with Brembo brakes also doesn't have the pedal-style brakes here. The key here is you've got a floating caliper there, that they are drilled. They have great heat dissipation. This is a little bit heavier bike, but again, nowhere near as heavy as some of the cruisers. As you're sport riding with a little bit heavier bike, you want great brakes, and of course it also has ABS. You can't see the ABS ring on this side, it's on the other side, but in addition to just ABS, it has the more advanced ABS, and it has the more advanced traction control in this bike. All of these are using wheel speed sensors and an IMU. IMU can measure the orientation of the bike and G-forces in many different ways. We're going to talk about that a lot, that IMU unit, quite a bit as we talk about how it's all used in braking and in other kinds of pieces of this bike. So overall, sporty intentions with touring as well. Let's work our way up here because we need to talk about lighting on this bike because it's very, very unique. So let's talk about that next. So if you go on the Kawasaki website, you're going to hear that this has all LED lighting, and that is mostly true. They are LED headlights here, there's LED cornering lights here, which is what we're going to talk about in a second, but be aware if you're buying in Canada that the signal lights front and rear are just the incandescent bulbs. I don't know why Kawasaki is doing that. It seems like a number of the bikes that get LED lights, LED signal lights worldwide in North America don't. Again, I don't have an answer for why that happens, but just be aware in Canada that doesn't. So let's talk really briefly about the LED headlights and these cornering lights. What you have is a bright white LED headlight with a sharp cutoff, and then you have cornering lights built in here. So there's 3 individual lights. As the bike leans, it uses that IMU to sense that it is leaning, and it turns on the top light first to light, then the next light as you lean more, then the next light as you lean more, and they are all individually aimed to give you a better view of the road. Now let's explain why that's important right now. All right, so this matters more on a modern bike than it ever used to on an older bike. And if you think about modern vehicles, they have really sharp cutoffs with the headlights, and that is for a whole bunch of reasons. One, it's just required. It helps people be less distracted. We'll talk about why that's important in a whole other video. But what you have is your road like this and your sharp cutoff headlight like this. And as soon as you start turning, the bike leans, and so does your sharp cutoff. So as it leans towards the way you're turning, you actually lose light where you need it, right? The road's level, your light leans, and that eliminates the light where you need it. So what the cornering lights do is as the bike leans, one light comes on. As it leans further, a second light comes on, and then a third light. And like I said, they're all individually aimed to light up the area where you're turning, because what you need when you turn is not less light, you need more light. So what they used to do is put, extra accessory lights on, which you could do this. You could have extra accessory driving lights on this bike, but you don't need to do that as much anymore unless you wanted those as sort of wide angle lights, because when you turn, you could now have lighted areas, and it figures out how much light you need based on how much you're leading all on its own, and that keeps the front aerodynamic, keeps it clean, keeps it nice, and still gives you the light that you need. So really important on a modern bike to have cornering lights like this, especially if you're driving at night, which you might be doing on a touring bike, especially if you're driving at night in areas you're less familiar, which you might be doing on a touring bike. So really cool system there that works. Let's keep moving through. So we're going to jump to the dash now. Usually I will get to the dash a little bit later in the video, but as we introduce some of the other technologies, it's important to understand how they work on the dash. And it's also important to know that this is a different dash than some of the other similar dashes. And I can already tell you right now, it's not filming great. It has a little bit more glare, a little bit less precision than I would like. Let's see if I can focus it in there a little bit. I don't know if we can, yeah. So bear with me, this is a crystal clear dash. Now what I like about this is the fact that it's a little bit old school. Most of our modern TFT displays, they have the tachometer running across the top. This one doesn't have that. This one has the traditional tachometer out on the left side, which I think works great, and it does clear up a little bit more space to have a little bit more information. The big thing I want to show you is off to the side on the right here. Well, we'll get to that in just a second there. You can't see it on the right of that screen, but we're going to zoom into that in a second here. So overall, you have a number of things going on. Let's just start with what you can see. You can see it's in sport mode right now. You do have rider modes in here, so you have the sport mode. You can see it's down to a road mode, which would be your regular everyday type driving, and then there's also a rain mode in here as well. So this bike has traction control. This bike has high and low power modes, which is important for however you want to set it up. But the simplest way to control all of that is just to go through in your rain, your road, and your sport mode. So I like leaving in road. That's probably where you're going to drive it most of the time. It still gives you the maximum power and that kind of stuff. And then there's a number of things in the TFT display. So hopefully you can see on the bottom here. In fact, let's just zoom in a little bit more. And we're going to see where it says odometer there. We're going to start changing some of those things around. So hopefully the camera corrects. There we go. All right, so again, I'd like it to show clear on camera. I think the camera is actually focusing on the screen a little bit in front of where the actual display is. So again, it's very clear in person, a little bit tough to film here. So overall, odometer. See where it says odometer there? We're going to flip through some of the options right there. Odometer, we all know what that is. Trip A, trip B, that's typical stuff. And then it has two different things. It has a lean angle. So this is a live lean angle. That green bar there is an active display that continues to move left or right to show you a visual display active while you're leaning. Now, if you're driving around the corner, you probably shouldn't be looking at a leaning display. So what you're going to do is click through, and this can show you your max lean angle. So this one has been leaned 24 degrees to the right, 27 degrees to the, or sorry, 24 degrees to the left, 27 degrees to the right. And then, again, this all uses that IMU. So the IMU that shows lean angle and various other things, you can see it there in the dash, but you can also see it working with the cornering control and, again, a lot of the safety type features. Now we're going to look just below that. You see the average fuel efficiency. Again, this bike has had 1 kilometer, so don't even pay any attention to average fuel efficiency. It's been idling a bunch. 5.3 kilometers per liter. You can also get liters per 100 kilometers, miles per gallon, all that kind of stuff. And then you have the range, which is distance until you're out of fuel. Then you have the average speed in there, the total time. The battery is at 12.4 volts right now, which is nice to have, especially as you're adding accessories. And we're back to the instant fuel efficiency. Left side fuel gauge, speedometer there. You can invert the colors, so if you want the white to be black and the black to be white, that's great. Very top corner, just off your screen, is the clock. It says 2:57. We still have to set up the clock on this one. And now what we're gonna look into is this piece right there in the center of your screen. I'm just gonna see if I can get it clear enough that you can see it without repositioning the camera. We'll just keep filming here. So let's zoom in some more. Again, bottom right corner of that display. That's clear enough that we can film on it anyways. All right, again, having trouble getting some focus here. What you have here is, this is a visual representation of some of the adjustable suspension pieces. So we're going to talk about suspension in a second, but I want to show you what we have right here first. So the first thing we're going to do is adjust the preload. It is currently set up for a single rider. This is just a preset in here, which is pretty handy. And then we're going to change it around to a rider and luggage. Now you can see it's moving left on your screen. That's because it is actually raising the bike just a tiny bit. Because it's a rider and their luggage, it's going to be a little extra weight. And because I have the tripod zoomed in so close, you can actually see that. We're going to set that again for the last position, which is 2 riders and their luggage. And again, I don't know if you see it moving a little bit left. I can feel it moving a little bit there. The camera may have corrected that. Again, much clearer in person, but you can right away tell where your preload is adjusted. So we're going to bring that back down to just a single rider. And maybe it'll move for you, maybe it won't. Just give it a second here as it sort of lightens up a little bit, enough to move back on the center stand. Yep, there it starts to go there. The entire bike is moving on the side stand. You can really see it at the end, kind of give a little bit extra. That's just one piece of the electronic suspension. So let's talk about the rest of it right now. So I demonstrated the electronic preload on this, which again, the Versys 650 has a little knob here. You can kind of adjust the same thing with your hands. That's electric. And you say, okay, that's fancy, that's great. But let's talk about how this actually adjusts for your everyday riding. Because some people feel like the electronic stuff, I don't really need that. But here's where it makes a big difference. It's not just preload that is adjustable. The whole system is computer monitored to see what you're doing as you're driving down the road. And it can adapt to the various segments by adapting the damping and that kind of thing as you drive. So that, of course, helps you smooth out the road, helps make it more comfortable, helps get you less fatigued on a longer ride. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. So suspension, a lot of time, we think of it as a comfort thing, but the most important thing suspension does is not your comfort. The most important thing a suspension does is keep the wheels in contact with the ground. So having something that is very adaptable, very adjustable, can really help you stay connected with the ground. And what's interesting about adjustable suspension on something like a sport bike is what you do in a race is you tweak that suspension as you drive for a certain speed, a higher speed type of driving. Whereas on this bike, you might be going very slow, you might be going very fast, and because the suspension is adjustable, it can adapt and it knows your speed. So it knows how fast you're going, which means if you hit a bump at 20 kilometers an hour or you hit a bump at 120 kilometers an hour, it's going to have to react differently, and this knows that and therefore adapts that. It also has the advantage of, if you were to jam on the brakes, it knows that you're braking and it knows the bike's going to want to dive. It can help adapt that so it doesn't dive as much. The overall system gives you a much safer ride, it gives you a much more smooth ride, and like I said, it keeps those wheels in contact with the ground, and that whole system works with the IMU. The IMU can not only sense forward and back movements, it also senses side-to-side movements, that lean angle like we showed you in the cornering light demonstration and the lean. So all of the systems, whether it's ABS, traction control, the suspension, all of those things that keep your wheels in contact with the ground are all sensing your position, everything, including the weight of the bike, the riders, everything about it, constantly sensing, constantly adapting, and that makes this bike pretty cool. I do want to briefly show you the windshield before we move on here. There is that big hole through here, and there's a hole at the bottom. Most of the time you only have this hole at the bottom because you have to balance the pressure front and back in order to prevent buffeting, to prevent that sort of dead spot that kind of sucks in and just kind of messes with the air. So you have the air flowing through here and the air flowing through here, and it's extra tall, and it has a adjustment knobs on the side so you can move it up. So it is not something that is designed to be moved when you're riding. It is, in fact, there's a sticker right here saying don't adjust it while you're riding, and they kind of make it hard to do that while you're riding. But it is something you can move up or down at any point you want. Just do a quick pullover. You can adjust it in seconds, move it up or down. But again, all of this opening here, like this big wind opening, if you compare this to like a cruiser bike that has a windshield that's more for style than it is for actual protection, this one is all about protection, and it allows that dead space to be filled with air so you have less buffeting while you're driving. Let's move on through. Let's talk very briefly about the seat here. This is a seat that doesn't show well in pictures and video because it doesn't show the width and the size. It kind of looks like a typical sport bike seat, but it has good firmness to it as well as having good support. So you've got kind of that wraps right up around here so you can tuck up against the tank and hold on there, but you can also kind of sit back and move around. It does have room to move around. It is nice and wide, and this is a solid backrest. As you're accelerating hard, and you can do that, we're going to talk about things like the quick shifter in a second. As you're accelerating hard, you're going to want some support behind you. You have that here, and that's really good. But what about your passenger? Well, what's cool about this is there's a bit of an illusion going on here. This looks like a sort of sporty seat kind of curved up, but when you feel underneath here, the top is actually not connected as well, and there's a very solid lip right up here that's kind of on the same angle as my hands there. So even if you don't put a top box on the back here, and we'll talk about that in a second as well, even if you don't do that, you have a nice solid piece of back of the seat here. So as you're accelerating, there is something that really holds that person in place there to make them feel very comfortable. So if you are touring with two people, this is a very wide, very comfortable, and very supportive seat with good support when you're sport riding or driving, you know, hard out of a corner or something like that. You've got good support there. You do have the rails here as well. We're going to talk about the bags and luggage right now. So these bags are excellent, and they come standard on the Versys 1000 and on the Versys 650. They're an option on the Versys 1000, and when you see, or sorry, not on the Versys 1000, they're an option on the Ninja 1000 SX, and when you add them to the Ninja, you start realizing some of the expense that goes into these bags. There is a sort of mounting bracket type piece in here that's just a little extra piece in there. There is this, you're choosing your color, the striping, you're choosing the color. All of this is standard on this bike, so you stay out of the accessories bin, and you get the option for this. Now, they can be disconnected here. You pull this up, you give it a bang, and it comes back. We're going to leave them on the bike for this video, but if you want to take them off, they are nice and quick release as well. They are keyed to the same key as the ignition, and when you pop this open like this and you fold down this, you've got this big sort of connection in there that you can quickly disconnect there that can hold everything in there. Now you have a few options. You can leave it sort of as is. That will fit a full face helmet. I have my you know, my Shoei RF 1400 helmet that easily fits in there. There's still space around it for other things. You can get Kawasaki accessory bags inside here that are soft bags you could take out and take with you. I don't really see a need for that. I don't find that anything really falls out of here when I open it up, especially if you're using this. It depends on how you pack it, I guess. But it has a big opening on the downside here as well, the outside here as well. And again, because they're quick release, you can take them off and take them into your hotel or whatever you want, or go camping, whatever you want. But you can also leave your stuff here, and it's locked. Not only is it locked, it's locked to the bike. These are really, really good bags, especially for manufacturer. In my opinion, they're better than a lot of the aftermarket bags because when they come off, it's a nice clean look. They're easy to use, they're keyed to ignition, they support all your stuff. They have some good weather protection. I've never had issues with rain getting to mine when I was using them. So overall, just great bags here. The Versys 1000 also comes standard with this rack right here, and this is sort of the bridging the gap of the Versys 300, the Versys 650 into here. The 650 does not have this as standard. The 300 has the rear rack as standard, or a different style of rear rack as standard, but not the side bags as standard, and here you gain everything. Now what's cool is there's just a couple of Allen keys here, so you can take this whole piece off and add your own types of accessories. You can add an extra Kawasaki rear box that again could be keyed to your ignition as well. Have a big box on here. That box could have a backrest on there, but even just as is, this is a hard, grippy type plastic, so if you're attaching things like a tent or other things on here, you've got some good tread here. You've got lots of places to tie things down. Whatever you wanted to put on here works as is, but it still becomes a place where you can add accessories in the future very quickly. You can just take out some Allen keys, adjust things, and there's lots of accessories that can be mounted to this both within the Kawasaki lineup and in the aftermarket world. There's a lot of options here for you without having to buy all of the other rack systems, all of the other support systems. It's all ready to go right as is. So this is a little bit of a busy shot here, but I'm going to point out a number of things all in sort of one shot. So first of all, this is a chain drive bike. That's going to give you the performance without the lack of power. And a lot of people say, okay, do I want to chain drive on a touring bike because you may have to do a little bit of chain maintenance? Well, it comes standard here with the center stand. So you can take a little bit of chain lube with you. You can do all your chain maintenance even on a long trip. So again, you have the sporting potential here with the chain, you have the maintenance abilities with the center stand. And again, little things that you could point out here, the catalytic converter is really the weight of the exhaust all down low. So you can see the whole weight is centered down low. And like I said, for a touring bike, this feels fairly light side to side. It is a big 1043cc four-cylinder engine, but it is something that does not feel crazy difficult to handle. So we talked about the touring capabilities. Let's talk about sporting capabilities. The 1043cc engine has long been part of the Ninja lineup. It's still part of the Ninja 1000 SX, which is a sport touring bike as well, which leans a little bit more towards sport. So if you want a little less touring capability, a little more sporting capability, that is a great bike to consider as well. It has the same engine. Now, even though they share engines, this one's retuned a little bit more for the touring market here than the all-out sport market, which is the 1000 SX of the Ninja. So a little different horsepower numbers you'll see there, but again, strong engine here. And unless you're riding at the very top of your revs all the time, you probably don't have any need for that extra horsepower that the Ninja 1000 makes. You do have the up-down quick shifter from the Ninja 1000. So what this is a little electronic, or sends an electronic signal. So when you're in first gear, you have to let out the clutch like you would on a normal bike, but switching up or down, you can keep full throttle, part throttle, you can keep on the throttle and just shift up. And what this does is it just sends a signal to the ignition to cut the ignition for a second, allows you to make the shift without releasing the throttle, and then it instantly gets it back on. So it is a lightning quick upshift, a lightning quick downshift as well. You can downshift and it'll rev match itself on the way back down. And again, once you come to a complete stop, you'll pull your clutch in. So you can turn that on or off if you want it. I love it because it just takes another little piece out of the sport riding experience. You can just shift really quickly on a 1000cc bike that accelerates this quick. You're not balancing that clutch perfectly. You're just shift, and off you go. It's kind of a cool piece there. And again, it's a really extra piece of sporting equipment. The other thing that's worth pointing out is you do have a little bit extra engine protection here. There is a little bar mounted here. If you were to drop something there, you have a little bit of protection. You can enhance protection if you wanted through the accessories department. So with all this advanced technology, let's talk about controls. You'd think this would be difficult to use, but it's actually not. So what you have here is kind of standard looking controls, but some of them are repurposed for this bike, which has a little bit extra technology. So let's just briefly talk about a few things. First of all, we talked about clutchless shifting through the quick shifter. You have that ability, but you also have a clutch lever here that's adjustable for reach, so you can put it sort of wherever you want it to make it work. It doesn't have as light of a clutch as the Versys 300, which is a crazy light, you can pull it with your pinky kind of clutch, but it is still a slipper and assist clutch, which is good because that does two things for you. It's a performance clutch if you are using your clutch to upshift or downshift, and let's say you have a lot of rev difference between gear shifts as you're braking or something like that, and you let out that clutch in a hurry. You could, in theory, without this bike or without this system, lock up that rear tire and have a little bit of squiggling around, that kind of thing. So the slipper and assist clutch allows the clutch to slip instead of the wheel, which allows for a little bit extra of an aggressive downshift, dumping the clutch kind of thing. It's something they brought in for the racetrack, but it also makes it more safe for the road. And then the side benefit is it gives you a little bit lighter clutch. So you're still going to use your clutch on this bike for various things. It's just because it has a quick shifter doesn't mean you always want to be quick shifting. Sometimes you want to use that clutch to just shift normally. And if you're driving through town, having a little bit lighter clutch pull is kind of nice. And again, it's adjustable for reach. So that's one piece. Then we move a little further back. You can see this little thing by my finger there. That is very typical on a lot of Kawasaki bikes to flash your high beam. So you can just sort of quickly flash it like that. Now, normally your high beam switch and low beam switch is right here, but on this bike, you're going to push that forward and that's going to lock on your high beam and pull it to take it off. So you do have a little different switch there, which allows you to have these switches here. Now, this level of switches is the same switches that are on the Ninja 1000 SX, but they're repurposed here. On the other one, you have a selection switch over here. This one is a preload switch. So this is where you're going to change that preload between that dash display with a single passenger, a passenger and luggage, and a passenger and luggage and another passenger. That's how you're changing that through here. If you hold these down in either direction, you're going to switch between your rider modes. If you tap them, you're going to switch that odometer, trip odometer that we showed you, and the fuel efficiency, battery voltage, all those kinds of things are down here. So the upper display changes by tapping here, the lower display changes by tapping here, the preload changes by holding this, and the rider mode changes by holding up or down here. Very simple to use. Once you understand what it is, it's kind of very intuitive and you don't forget. You have cruise control over here because of course you do. It's a touring bike. It's electronic cruise control, so it works very well. Set it to the exact speed you want and it will hold that speed. A little reset button here for your center display, signals, horn, and four-way flashers or hazard lights, which is what you want. And then you have the heated grips here. I'm going to do a future video on Kawasaki's heated grips. I like the way they visually look. There's some glare here, so it doesn't quite visually fit, but I like the way they visually fit into everything here. There's some pros and cons to this, so I'm going to do a video of that in the near future here because I put them on my bike. They're standard on this bike, so you have standard here, heated grips with the hand wind protection, which is really nice for touring. You're just not going to have an issue with getting cold hands, even if you don't want to wear the full winter gloves. You've got, between the wind protection and that, you've got good, good ability to keep your hands warm. Let's just glance at the other side here for a second just to show you that control. Before we do that, I should point out that there is a round handlebar here, not a clip-on or anything else like that, so that gives you a ton of options to mount things like a GPS or anything else, and you do have a 12-volt power socket there as well, which allows you to mount a GPS in any way you wanted onto your handlebars or other ways. There's lots of ways to mount them these days, but it does put a power point right in the same general vicinity as where you would want a GPS, and that of course sets this up as a touring bike just great. In fact, I think we can just zip over here since we've already done this. Excuse my terrible camera work. Let's just show that throttle side over there. The brake lever there is also adjustable for reach, so you have that. Let's just zoom right in here. You do have your start and kill switch all built into one. Same thing on some other bikes. The Ninja ZX4RR has this now. The Ninja 1000 has this. And then this selection switch, remember we said that preload switch was the selection switch on the other side, so you just have a two-handed control here to select something in the controls. It looks like there's a lot going on here, but all of it is very intuitive. You got to give Kawasaki credit. It's very simple to understand and control. Once you own this bike, a good couple minutes of just learning it and you'll have it set in your head and you can control it all without having to take your hands off the handlebars, which is what you want. So we spent some time talking about the IMU in here, which is used by all different things. There is another Kawasaki Cornering Management Function, KCMF acronym, that I do want to point out because it's pretty cool. It's only really in the regular bikes in the Versys 1000 and the Ninja 1000. And basically what it is again, it uses that IMU. So it can tell all kinds of forces, twisting forces, turning forces, all those kind of G forces in basically every which direction. It can sense what's going on, and that cornering management function, basically what it does is it can sense you tracing a line through a corner as you're going into the corner, through the apex, and coming out of the corner, and it works with you by sensing the forces. So as you're applying brake forces and it can sense the engine braking forces, it will help balance your line, allowing you to really just trace that line exactly in and exactly out so that the bike takes the line you want. Combine that with the advanced traction control, the cornering ABS, all of the pieces that are on here with the suspension that can also adapt in real time to the types of riding you're doing. And this becomes something which, although it appears to be larger, really handles well. And the technology is one of those things that stays out of your way as opposed to comes into your way. It just feels like a good riding bike where it gives you confidence because the suspension's always keeping you in contact with the ground. The cornering management function along with the other systems are all working to give you confidence, so you don't feel them at work, but they are at play, and that's the sign of great technology. So let's talk about who this bike is for. Let's compare it right in that Versys lineup. That 300, again, lightweight, around town, can do tours, but it's gonna have budget components. This is the opposite of that, does not have budget components. The Versys 650 is a really good option. If you like this bike, but this is a little bit more expensive than you want to, or more money than you want to spend, that 650 is a great option. The 650 has that little bit lighter weight sort of flickability that this one just starts to step out of a little bit. But where the 650 in my mind fell short as a touring bike is as a second person touring bike, or the fact that it doesn't have things like electronic cruise control. So you could buy a throttle lock and lock the throttle on, but you don't have that precision control and that kind of thing. This is just a phenomenal touring bike. If you're thinking about going with like a bagger or something like that, you're going to lose part of the fun of motorcycling in my mind. You want something that handles. To me, a motorcycle should handle well, should be able to do all those things. The form does follow function, so you're going to have a bit of a sport bikey kind of look to this in a different proportion, so the looks are something you're going to have to decide they work for you. I like the look, but it doesn't really look like any other motorcycle. Where this one shines is competing with very high-end bikes at a better price point, competing with things like, hey, you want the ability to travel like the gold wings of old, you know, but you want something that's way more fun to drive. Why buy something like that when you can take all the luggage you need in something like this? You have great fuel efficiency, but when you get to those fun roads, you still have the ability to have fun. You've got that electronic suspension, you've got all of the different electronic components that are going to help keep you safe with the traction controls, the ABS, the rider modes, that kind of thing. So this is a very easy to drive 1000cc bike that, although looks huge, is not incredibly heavy and is very manageable for a lot of people. It's not your best first bike, but it is a great all-rounder. If you want a bike that you can zip around town in, this works just fine. If you want a bike that you can drive on the interstate highways for long times, this is also just fine. If the idea of going on a trip with your motorcycle is a lot of major highways and then some fun roads, this one still has the ability to be fun on those roads as you get out there. So that is my overall review, especially technology review of this Versys 1000 bike. It's a bike that I love. It's a bike that I think fits a lot of people, but you can tell me what you still want to know. Is there something about the technology or something about this bike that you still think I need to cover? No problem. Let me know in the comments below, because again, I'm filming here at Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's Power Sports. I have complete access to their entire vehicle lineup, and if there's something you want to know about this bike, let me know in the comments section, and we'll continue to update you both in the comments and in future videos. And if you want to see this bike in person, it was just assembled yesterday from Kawasaki into the dealership here today. So what is it, the 12th or so of May? You can come by and see this. This is a 2023 model. This color, I didn't even cover the color. It's like a matte black over here. It's like a matte reddish color over here. It doesn't reproduce perfectly on film, so make sure you come in and see it. This is Canada's #1 volume Kawasaki dealer. This is a bike worth adding to your fleet, or worth replacing everything in your fleet, because it does a great job of that. So make sure you come see it. And again, if you have questions, let me know in the comments. Thanks everybody for watching.